going on, everybody? Dr. Reed here. Um, Today I'm gonna finish up a lecture series on the basal ganglia, and let me wait a few minutes, and I'll give some more people a few times to come in. And we had a chance to look at almost everything, a lot of these networks, and let me just review them quickly. Let me try to find it YouTube. Let me see. Let me see if I can look at here I'm on my channel Read Matrix here. Let me see if I can sort of review the discussions on the basal ganglia. So here, upcoming after this discussion, we're going to first work on my series on narcissism as a network here at Shikari Richardson. Why the mental health system can't really protect you from narcs. Very interesting series to watch. But here, so we can see the basal ganglia. I believe I'm finished with that. We did the basal ganglia movement disorders. We went through that. Let's see, basal ganglia. We went through understanding Huntington's disease, the G proteins, basically the signaling molecules within the basal ganglia. Then we went through the basal ganglia, the key network and pathways. Okay, breaking down the basal ganglia again, Muhammad Ali and Parkinson's disease. Okay, anything else with the basal ganglia here? Basal ganglia here. Okay, I think that's it. So for today, I think I'm gonna finish up the discussion on the basal ganglia, and it's important for you to sort of adopt this behavior into your continuing medical education journey. So, after you study these particular areas, then I usually do a literature review on it to try to get a good idea of what's the most current research out there, what they're saying and things like that. It's a very interesting thing to do, and I'm going to show you how to do it very quickly, and it's not going to take much time. So, and this is how I'm going to stay up on what's going on. And for us, for now, I'm simply going to use a free resource. I'm going to go to simply Google Scholars. So let's get it in, okay? So here, let me just go here to Google Scholar. All right. Basic stuff, okay? Okay. Let's see. First, let me just go through a few things. I'm fine. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, this is 2025. Oh, 2 days ago. Oh, they get it in 3 days ago. This is the most current, huh? Neuronal intranuclear inclusion disease complicated by acute middle cerebral artery infarction. Remember, we're talking about those inclusion bodies and things like that. Let me see. Let me see what they're talking about here. Sounds interesting. Neuronal intranuclear inclusion disease complicated by acute. I didn't know there was a disease. There's a new disease. Oh, no, let me back up out of that. Let me back up out of the new disease section. Okay, I just want basal ganglia stuff. Statistical network models for flexible behavior. Finally, we will present our recent network modeling neuromodulation in the cortical basal development. bathymic loop during the flexible motif generation. Okay, whatever that is. Dynamic modeling the hippocampus basal ganglia interaction for septal navigation. Stuff's interesting. Forest disease. Okay, new diseases again. Diabetes. Okay, yeah. Increased frontal CT binding in Parkinson's disease patients with self-reported RMB. Teaching neuronal images. Maybe I need to sort of narrow my search down. Okay, related searches. So we went through, did we go through stroke? Okay, thalamus. We went through motor because we went through the networks, frontal basal ganglia, basal calcification, hemorrhage. Okay, let me see here. Basal ganglia. What is this cortex? Let me see basal ganglia stroke. Providing explicit information disrupt implicit motor lesion after basal ganglia stroke. Providing explicit information disrupt implicit motor learning after basal ganglia stroke. Despite their purported neuroanatomic and functional isolation, empirical evidence suggests that sometimes conscious explicit processes can influence implicit motor skill learning. Yeah, I think that's true. Our goal was to determine if the provision of explicit information affected implicit motor sequence learning after damage to the basal ganglia. Okay, I think that may be too much for its purposes. Movement disorders following cerebral lesion. Okay, I think that this is something useful for us. Movement disorders following cerebral. Okay, great. Okay, movement disorders are primarily associated with basal ganglia and the thalamus, right? Okay, therefore, movement disorders are frequently manifested after strokes compared with neurological injuries associated with other structures in the brain, right? Yeah. Overall clinical features such as types of movement disorders, the time of onset, and prognosis are similar with movement disorders after stroke or other structures, right? Great. Dystonias and choreas are commonly occurring post-stroke movement disorders due to basal ganglia circuits. And these disorders rarely present with tremor. Okay. Hey, this is great. This is really interesting. Okay, here, rare movement disorders, including tics, restless leg syndrome, and whatever that is, can also develop from a stroke, right? Although the precise mechanism underlying the pathogenesis of these conditions have not been fully characterized. Disruption of the cross-sections between the inhibitory and excitatory circuits. Remember, the inhibitory, the direct, and the indirect pathway circuits resulting from vascular insults are proposed to be the underlying causes. So basically, interrupting of any of the pathways through the stroke is what causes the movement disorder. And I guess where is interrupting that? GABA ergic and dopaminergic systems play a key role in post-stroke movement disorders, right? Yeah, the basal ganglia primarily dopaminergic, but have a lot of GABA receptors. This review summarized movement disorders induced by basal ganglia and thalamic strokes according to anatomical regions by which they manifest. Hey, I think this may be a good study for us to look at just for the next 10 minutes. Stuff like that. I'm afraid if I go back into the list, I don't think I'll find anything else. I don't want to blow my routine. I don't want to blow my lecture up. Okay. Great. Movement disorders manifest following a stroke are most frequently associated with lesions in the basal ganglia. That makes sense, right? That's where all the networking is at. And the thalamus is where all the switching is at. The probability of developing a movement disorder after infarction in deep nuclei infarction, such as one affecting the basal ganglia and thalamus, is 3 times greater than compared to surface infarction. Makes sense? Okay, let's see here. The frequency of post-stroke movement disorders. Okay, Korea. So both of these studies basically ranked the type of disorders in the same order. I guess this Ecuador stroke study didn't involve these other things, but look, career here, right? The rapid or sudden jerky movement. Yeah, dystonia, interference with the career is more like if you interfere with the intermediate pathway, or was a direct pathway for hunting. The career seen as Huntington's disease, and it's the injury to the direct pathway. Just check that out. I don't want to be getting mixed up, but I think it's injury to the direct pathway. Okay, the dystonia, I guess the indirect pathway, one of those limb shaking, myoclonus, stereotypic movements, asterisks, tremors, that dysarthria, Parkinsonism, which is a range of sort of like slow moving symptoms. So this post-stroke movement disorders in the basal ganglia resulting in a range of movement disorders, highest being chorea and dystonia. Functional anatomy, here's that circuit again. Here's the circuit again, guys. Yep, same circuit, inhibitory to cytatory inhibitory to basal ganglia. Let's see if they have anything else here. Common reported movement disorders occurring after stroke. Okay. Onset chorea. Here's the same pattern here. Okay, look, chorea acute. Okay, but I remember going through this in neuroanatomy. And here it is again. And some after all these time, I still don't think I'm gonna memorize it. But here. Located over in these sections. Yeah, memorize it, guys, for your USMLE step 3. Okay, hyperkinetic movement disorders. Right, yeah, hyperkinetics. Okay. Remember the ones similar to Huntington's disease. The hyperkinetic movement disorders have been described on the basis of basal ganglia modeling. Yeah, typically lesions in the substantia nigra, I think at STN, and decreases the excitation of the basal ganglia output and consequently reduces thalamic input. Yeah, you can go through that circuit. GABA and dopamine systems might contribute to post-stroke movement disorders. Of course, those are the neurotransmitters that run our systems. However, hyperkinetic movement disorders are relatively rare when the basal ganglia are markedly damaged. Yeah, if it's markedly damaged, then they're like things to be shut off. Involuntary movements arise after basal ganglia infarction, typically results from clearly defined lesions. Okay, great. Let me see here. Okay, the types of movement disorder, there's the chorea we're talking about. Okay, the dystonias we're talking about. Yeah, minus clonus. And so let's go into more descriptions of these tests. Let me see. And I didn't want to go too much into this, but I did want to let me go through one more briefly. And for the students, I'm just going to encourage you when you study this stuff. Right now we're like 13 minutes, and so I think you can go through like five, 6, or 7 really good studies just briefly to just get yourself familiar with what's going on out there. And I think it'll be a good idea to start doing it as you go on with your studies, because I think the research and studies very useful in keeping you up to date in your learning and remembering things like the neuroanatomy and things like that. Patients with stroke confined to basal ganglia have diminished response to rehab efforts. So strokes just confined to the basal ganglia, okay, may cause persistent corticothalamic basal ganglia interactions. Let me just see this briefly. Okay. Patients with basal ganglia internal capsule injury were more likely to have hypotonia, placid for paralysis, and persistently impaired balance and ambulation performance. While all patients had a comparable rehab experience, this result suggested that patients with strokes confined to the basal ganglia and in kernel capsule may benefit less from therapy. Isolated basal ganglia strokes may cause persistent corticothalamic basal ganglia interactions that are dysfunctional and impede interactions. Wow. Okay. So strokes that are defined within the Basal ganglia internal capsid may make it more difficult for the patients to have some degree of rehab because I guess the hypotonia it produces. Okay. Systemic review of meta-analysis of word production abilities and dysfunctions in the basal ganglia. Okay, yeah, word fluency. Yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to test word fluency in basal ganglia. Oh, wow. Basal ganglia small vessel disease and Parkinson's disease. So testing word frequency, systemic review, and meta analysis of word production abilities and dysfunctions of the basal ganglia, such as stroke, small vessels disease, Parkinson's disease, and Huntington's disease. And what's the benefit? Oh, I saw. Oh, yeah, I think you have to pay for this. Yeah, get your hopes up high. You'll stay in the free section. Okay, alterations in functional connectivity in stroke patients with basal ganglia damage and cortical impairments. Alteration in functional connectivity. Wow. Okay, cognitive deficits following stroke and basal ganglia. Hey, just look at that. The objecting to examine. Okay, oh, what's up the cookies? Objected, examine the effect of stroke in the basal ganglia on cognitive functioning. The results stress the notion that subcortical damage may lead to substantial neuropsychological disorders and have clear implications for neuropsychological rehab. Yeah, subcortical damage, yeah, damage in the basal ganglia. Okay. But I think that's it for now. So we're at 17 minutes. And so I just encourage you to start looking up on your studies every day, your studies as you go through this. And let me see if I have any questions, guys. So hey guys, thank you a lot for showing up. I appreciate everything. Thanks for the music, guys. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's see. Freaking Frax. Which disorders are more strongly which disorders are more strongly linked to the basal ganglia dysfunction? Movement disorders. And I'm glad the literature review is showing us different types of, after some damage to the basal ganglia, it leads to strokes, the different types of movement disorders a person can have, the highest being choreas, the jerky movements and dystonias and things like that. Okay, and next is Umber. Hey, Umber, how you doing? Why does basal ganglia damage cause slow movements in Parkinson's, but excessive movement in Huntington's? In Huntington's, it's like the brakes are cut off. There's no inhibition, so there's nothing stopping the initiation of movements, right? And in Parkinson's, you get the buildup of the intra-inclusion bodies that eventually destroy the dopaminergic producing cell. When you get a death of enough cells in the basal ganglia, particularly in the substantia nigra, then you get less dopamine in the entire part of that substantia nigra. And so the whole network is hypodopaminergic because the brain cells let's say if you start off with 100 brain cells and 30 of them die out, those 70 brain cells will still not be able to produce as much dopamine as the whole system. And I think it's more like an issue like that. But thank you so much for your question. Okay. Hey, Nayab. Okay, Parkinson's, Huntington's, and dystonia are more related to basal ganglia in terms of mood disorder. Perfect, Nayab. Just perfect. All right, guys, and that's all I really wanted to do for today. I'm almost at 20 minutes, and so let's go ahead and wrap it up today. And so if you have any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, read out. Take care of yourself. You have a nice day, guys. Ciao.